7 true tales that will make you never camp again. The sound of a twig snapping outside your tent at 3 a.m. might not just be a raccoon. For these real campers, their worst nightmares became reality when what should have been peaceful getaways turned into their final moments on Earth. Before we dive into these terrifying true stories, I want to warn you, everything you're about to hear is 100% real. These aren't urban legends or campfire tales. These are documented cases with police reports, witness testimonies, and in some cases, convicted killers. If you're planning a camping trip soon, you might want to reconsider after hearing what happened to these unfortunate souls who simply wanted to enjoy the great outdoors. The 1970s and 80s marked a significant shift in how Americans viewed outdoor recreation. The post-Vietnam era saw a surge in people seeking solace in nature, with national park attendance reaching record numbers. Camping was considered safe, wholesome family entertainment. The idea that danger lurked in these peaceful settings was almost unthinkable. Before these high-profile cases, campground security was minimal. Most parks had no nighttime patrols, emergency communication systems were primitive or non-existent, and campers often left their tents unlocked. The wilderness was viewed as an escape from the dangers of urban life, not a place where those dangers might follow. This perception of safety created perfect hunting grounds for those with sinister intentions. Remote locations, vulnerable victims, and minimal security oversight created a perfect storm that would forever change how we approach camping safety. Case 1. Gary Michael Hilton, the National Forest Serial Killer. Our first story takes us to the serene forests of Appalachian National Forest in Florida, where a group of friends had a chilling encounter with a man who would later be revealed as one of America's most notorious serial killers. In 2007, a group of college friends decided to spend a weekend camping in Appalachian National Forest. The weather was perfect, not too hot, with clear skies perfect for stargazing. As they set up their campsite, they noticed an older man living out of his van nearby. Nothing seemed particularly unusual about him at first. He was friendly, if a bit eccentric, and struck up a conversation with the group. The man introduced himself as Gary and chatted with them about hiking trails and wildlife in the area. Though something felt off about him, the friends didn't think much of it. He seemed knowledgeable about the forest and camping, just another outdoor enthusiast enjoying nature. They shared a few beers with him that evening before returning to their own campsite. What they didn't know was that Gary Michael Hilton had already begun his killing spree. Just months earlier, he had murdered 24-year-old Meredith Emerson, an experienced hiker who had been enjoying a New Year's Day hike with her dog on Blood Mountain in Georgia. Emerson was no easy target. She was physically fit and trained in martial arts. According to court documents, she fought fiercely for her life, even managing to get Hilton's knife and baton away from him at one point. Investigators would later discover that Hilton had a calculated method. He would approach hikers with his dog, using the animal as a way to seem trustworthy and start conversations. He specifically targeted women hiking alone or couples in remote areas. After subduing his victims, he would force them to reveal their ATM PIN numbers before killing them and disposing of their bodies deep in the forest. Months after their encounter, these same friends were watching the news when they saw a familiar face, the same man they'd shared drinks with at the campsite. His name was Gary Michael Hilton, and he had just been arrested for Emerson's murder. As the story unfolded on their TV screen, they learned that Hilton had murdered multiple people at various national forests and parks across the Southeast. The friends immediately contacted the FBI and provided detailed accounts of their interaction with Hilton. Their information helped authorities connect Hilton to additional murders in Florida and North Carolina. Investigators would later discover human remains near the campsite where the friends had met Hilton. What makes this story particularly disturbing is how normal Hilton appeared to these campers. He didn't fit the stereotype of a deranged killer. He was articulate, knowledgeable about the outdoors, and able to blend in perfectly with other campers. This allowed him to hunt for victims in national forests across multiple states. FBI profiler Mark Safarik later commented on Hilton's case. What made Hilton so dangerous was his ability to appear completely normal and even helpful to fellow outdoor enthusiasts. He understood the culture and language of hikers and campers, which allowed him to gain their trust quickly. Gary Michael Hilton was eventually convicted of multiple murders and is currently serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. His case serves as a chilling reminder that danger can lurk in the most peaceful settings, wearing the most ordinary disguises. Case 2, Vancouver Island Murders, the Hippie Trail Killings. Now, let's travel north to the beautiful but remote wilderness of Vancouver Island, Canada, where another camping trip ended in tragedy. In 1972, Vancouver Island was a popular destination for hippies and nature lovers seeking to escape conventional society. Among them were Ann Durant and Leif Carlson, a young couple camping on a secluded beach near Radar Beach. Ann was a 20-year-old free spirit from Ontario with flowing blonde hair and a passion for photography. Friends described her as gentle and kind, someone who saw beauty in everything around her. Leif, 19, was a Swedish national who had come to Canada to experience its natural wonders. The two had met at a commune in British Columbia and bonded over their shared love of nature and photography. They were part of the counterculture movement, rejecting materialism and seeking spiritual connection through nature. The area was known for its stunning coastline and peaceful atmosphere, attracting those looking to commune with nature. Ann and Leif had set up their campsite away from others, seeking privacy and tranquility. They were experienced campers who had spent considerable time outdoors. On June 21, 1972, another camper made a horrifying discovery. Ann and Leif were found murdered in their sleeping bags. Both had been shot at close range while they slept. Their possessions were untouched, ruling out robbery as a motive. The brutal and seemingly random nature of the killings sent shockwaves through the community of campers and locals. Police investigation revealed a potential suspect, Joseph Henry Burgess, a man known for his extreme religious views who had been living in the woods nearby. Witnesses reported that Burgess had expressed outrage at unmarried couples camping together, considering it immoral. He had been seen in the area around the time of the murders and disappeared immediately afterward. The investigation was complicated by the remote location and the transient nature of the camping community. Many potential witnesses had already moved on, and physical evidence was limited by the technology of the time. Despite an extensive manhunt, Burgess managed to evade capture for decades. The case went cold, with only occasional leads that never panned out. The families of Ann and Leif were left without closure, wondering if justice would ever be served. Criminologist Dr. Michael Arntfield later analyzed the case. The Radar Beach murders represent a perfect storm of vulnerability. Remote location, victims who trusted others in their community, and a killer who could easily disappear into the wilderness. The counterculture ethos of the time, which emphasized trust and openness, unfortunately created an environment where predators could operate. In a strange twist of fate, in 2009, nearly 4 decades after the murders, Burgess was killed in a shootout with police in New Mexico after attempting to rob a remote cabin. Items found in his possession linked him to other unsolved murders of camping couples. While authorities strongly believe Burgess was responsible for the murders of Ann and Leif, the case remains officially unsolved. The passage of time and Burgess's death mean that certain questions may never be answered, leaving this as one of Canada's most notorious cold cases. Case 3, Oklahoma Girl Scout Murders. From the remote beaches of Canada, we move to the heartland of America, where one of the most disturbing crimes in Oklahoma history took place at a Girl Scout camp. It was supposed to be an exciting summer adventure for the young girls attending Camp Scott in Mays County, Oklahoma in June 1977. The 410-acre camp was nestled in the woods, offering a perfect setting for outdoor activities, friendship bracelets, and campfire songs. The 3 victims, Laurie Lee Farmer 8, Michelle Heather Guse, 9, and Doris Denise Milner, 10, were from different backgrounds but shared a love for adventure and the outdoors. Lori was described by her family as bright and precocious, already planning to become a doctor. Michelle was quiet and thoughtful with a talent for art. Denise was outgoing and athletic, always the first to volunteer for activities. For all three girls, this was their first time away from home at summer camp, an important milestone in their young lives. On June 12, 1977, camp counselors made a horrifying discovery that would forever change the peaceful reputation of Camp Scott. The three girls were found murdered. The girls had been raped, bludgeoned, and strangled. Their bodies were discovered about 150 yards from their tent, which was the furthest tent from the counselors' cabin. What made this case even more disturbing was that there had been warning signs 2 months before the murders. During a training session at the camp, counselors found a disturbing note in an empty cabin claiming that 3 campers would be murdered. The note was dismissed as a prank. Additionally, a counselor's tent had been ransacked, and a donut had been stolen from the kitchen. These incidents were not taken seriously at the time. The primary suspect in the case was Jean Leroy Hart, a local man who had escaped from prison 4 years earlier and was hiding in the area. Hart knew the camp well, having grown up nearby. Physical evidence found at the scene, including a flashlight, was linked to him. The investigation was one of the largest in Oklahoma history, involving multiple agencies and hundreds of officers. The crime scene was processed meticulously, but the heavy rain that had fallen that night had washed away crucial evidence. Investigators collected what they could: fingerprints, footprints, hair samples, and the mysterious flashlight that would become a central piece of evidence. Despite a massive manhunt, Hart wasn't captured until April 1978, nearly a year after the murders. He was put on trial but was ultimately acquitted of the murders due to insufficient evidence. The jury wasn't convinced beyond a reasonable doubt of his guilt, despite the circumstantial evidence against him. Sheriff Mike Reed, who later re-investigated the case, stated, "The DNA evidence we've been able to recover strongly suggests Hart's involvement, despite his acquittal. When you combine this with his criminal history and behavior patterns, the picture becomes clearer. But the passage of time has made absolute certainty difficult to achieve." Hart was returned to prison to serve the remainder of his sentence for previous crimes. He died of a heart attack in prison in 1979, just 2 months after his acquittal in the Girl Scout murders. In 2022, DNA testing was conducted on items from the crime scene. While the results were inconclusive due to the degradation of the samples over time, authorities stated that what testing they could do did not eliminate Hart as the suspect. Camp Scott never reopened after the murders. Today it stands abandoned, a silent memorial to the 3 young lives lost that night. The case officially remains unsolved, though many investigators still believe Hart was responsible. The families of the victims continue to seek closure in a case that has haunted Oklahoma for over 4 decades. Case 4, Shenandoah National Park Murders. Our next story takes us to the beautiful but sometimes dangerous Shenandoah National Park in Virginia, where 2 experienced hikers met a tragic end. Shenandoah National Park is known for its stunning vistas along Skyline Drive and the Appalachian Trail that runs through it. In May 1996, Julie Williams, 24, and Laura Lolly Winans, 26, decided to take a backpacking trip through this picturesque landscape with their golden retriever, Taj. Julie was a geologist with a bright future ahead of her. Friends described her as passionate about the environment and always eager to explore new trails. She had recently accepted a position with the U.S. Geological Survey and was celebrating before starting her new job. Lolly was an experienced outdoor guide who had dedicated her life to helping others connect with nature. She worked at outdoor leadership schools and was known for her patient teaching style and deep knowledge of wilderness survival. The 2 women had met at a wilderness school where Lolly was an instructor and Julie was taking a course. When the women didn't return from their trip as scheduled, Julie's father reported them missing on June 1. Park rangers began a search and made a horrifying discovery on June 2. The bodies of both women were found at their campsite near Skyland Resort, a remote area of the park. They had been bound and gagged with their throats cut. Their dog was found unharmed, still tied to a nearby tree. The crime scene told a disturbing story. The women's tent had been slashed open, suggesting they had been attacked while sleeping. There was evidence of a struggle, indicating that at least one of the women had fought back against their attacker. Personal items were scattered around the campsite, but nothing of value had been taken, ruling out robbery as a motive. The brutal nature of the crime shocked the park community and raised fears about safety in national parks. The FBI joined the investigation, which became one of the largest in the park's history. In 2001, Daryl David Rice was indicted for the murders. Prosecutors alleged that Rice had selected the women because of their sexual orientation, as both were lesbians. However, in 2004, all charges against Rice were dropped when DNA evidence failed to link him to the crime scene. Criminal behavioral analyst Laura Richards, who collaborated with investigative journalist Catherine Miles on the case, noted, "The crime scene behavior suggests a perpetrator who was familiar with the park and possibly had been stalking the victims. The level of violence indicates a deep-seated rage that likely manifested in other aspects of the killer's life." Another potential suspect emerged years later, Richard Mark Ivanitz, a serial killer who had murdered 3 young girls in Virginia. Ivanitz committed suicide in 2002 when cornered by police in Florida. Some investigators believe Ivanitz may have been responsible for the Shenandoah murders, but no definitive evidence has linked him to the case. Despite multiple suspects and years of investigation, the case remains unsolved. The FBI officially considers it an open investigation. The murders changed how many people, especially women, viewed safety in national parks and led to increased security measures in many outdoor recreation areas. Case 5, Texas Campsite Massacre. From Virginia, we travel to the Lone Star State of Texas, where what began as a family gathering turned into one of the most horrific mass murders in the state's history. In October 2015, members of the Camp and Johnson families gathered for a weekend camping trip in Anderson County, Texas. They had rented a piece of property with a small cabin and plenty of space for tents near Tennessee Colony, about 100 miles southeast of Dallas. The group included Carl Johnson, his daughter Hannah, her 6-year-old son Cade, Hannah's boyfriend Thomas Camp, and Thomas's 2 adult sons, Nathan and Austin. Carl Johnson was a retired aerospace engineer with a passion for fishing. His daughter Hannah was a dedicated single mother who worked as a nurse. Her son Cade was described as a bright, energetic boy who loved the outdoors. Thomas Camp was a hard-working electrician who had recently purchased the property where they were camping as a place for family gatherings. His sons, Nathan and Austin, were in their early 20s, both working and studying. The families were celebrating Thomas's recent purchase of the property and were looking forward to a weekend of fishing, hunting, and enjoying the outdoors together. The weather was perfect for camping, with clear skies and mild temperatures. On the evening of November 14, a man named William Hudson approached their campsite. Hudson lived on adjacent property and believed the land the families were camping on should have belonged to his family. Despite this resentment, Hudson initially appeared friendly. He helped the group when their vehicle got stuck and was invited to socialize with them around the campfire. What the families didn't know was that Hudson had been drinking heavily and harboring deep anger about the property. As the evening progressed, Hudson's demeanor changed. In a horrific turn of events, Hudson attacked the group, killing 6 of the 7 family members. Only Cynthia Johnson, Carl's wife, survived by hiding in the cabin and calling 911 in the early hours of the morning. The investigation revealed the brutality of Hudson's attack. Some victims had been beaten to death, while others had been shot. In an attempt to hide his crimes, Hudson had dragged some of the bodies to a pond on his property. The crime scene was so extensive that investigators spent days processing evidence across both properties. Hudson was quickly identified as the suspect and arrested at his mother's house nearby. He was covered in blood but refused to speak to investigators. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including blood evidence, the murder weapons found on his property, and the survivor's testimony. In November 2017, Hudson was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. He is currently on death row in Texas, awaiting execution. The case stands as one of the most disturbing examples of how quickly a seemingly normal camping trip can turn deadly when encountering the wrong person in a remote location. Case 6. Keddie Cabin Murders. Our sixth story takes us to a small resort town in California, where a family's cabin vacation turned into a nightmare that has haunted the community for decades. Keddie is a small resort town in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. In the early 1980s, it was a quiet community of cabins where people would vacation or live year-round. Cabin 28 was home to Glenna Sue Sharp and her 5 children, who had moved there in November 1980 after Sue left an abusive relationship. On the night of April 11, 1981, Sue had invited her son's friend, 17-year-old John Sharp, no relation, to stay over. The cabin was modest but comfortable with a living room, kitchen, and 3 bedrooms. It was nestled among pine trees with other cabins nearby but still offering privacy. The next morning, Sue's 14-year-old daughter Sheila, who had been staying at a friend's house that night, returned home to a scene of unimaginable horror. In the living room, she discovered the bodies of her mother, her brother John, 15, and John's friend. All 3 had been bound with electrical wire and medical tape. They had been stabbed, bludgeoned, and strangled. The level of violence was extreme, suggesting a frenzied attack. Strangely, Sue's 2 youngest sons and another daughter, Tina, 12, were in an adjacent bedroom during the attack. The 2 boys were unharmed, but Tina was missing from the cabin. Her remains would not be discovered until 3 years later in 1984, about 50 miles from Keddie in Camp 18, Butte County. The investigation revealed several potential suspects, including Marty Smart, who lived in a nearby cabin with his wife, who was friends with Sue and his friend Bo Baubed. Smart had a history of violence and had reportedly been angry with Sue for encouraging his wife to leave him. Another suspect was Justin Eason, a local with a criminal record who knew the family. Despite having suspects and some physical evidence, including a hammer believed to be one of the murder weapons, no arrests were ever made. The case went cold, with occasional reinvestigations over the years. In a tragic epilogue to the story, Cabin 28 was demolished in 2004, perhaps in an attempt to erase the physical reminder of the horrific crime. In 2016, the case was reopened with new DNA testing technology. Investigators discovered a recording of a call Marty Smart made to his wife after the murders, which contained incriminating statements. Both Smart and Baubed have since died. And while investigators now believe they were responsible for the murders, no one has ever been officially charged. The case remains technically unsolved, though the sheriff's department considers it solved but not prosecutable due to the deaths of the primary suspects. The Keddie murders, as they came to be known, have inspired books, documentaries, and even the horror film The Strangers. They remain one of California's most notorious unsolved crimes, and a chilling reminder of the vulnerability of families even in seemingly safe vacation settings. Case 7. Appalachian Trail Murders. Our final story brings us to the Appalachian Trail, America's most famous long-distance hiking path, where a killer stalked hikers not once but twice. The Appalachian Trail stretches over 2,190 miles from Georgia to Maine, passing through some of the most beautiful wilderness in the eastern United States. In May 1981, 2 social workers from Maine, Susan Ramsey, 26, and Robert Mountford, Jr., 27, were hiking a section of the trail in Virginia as part of a charity walk for the mentally disabled. The pair were experienced hikers who had carefully planned their journey. They had proper equipment and had informed friends and family of their route. The section they were traversing was in Giles County, Virginia, known for its scenic beauty and moderate difficulty. When Ramsey and Mountford failed to arrive at their designated checkpoint, a search was initiated. On June 1, 1981, Mountford's body was found in a shallow grave near the trail. He had been shot twice in the head. 3 days later, Ramsay's body was discovered nearby. She had been beaten and stabbed multiple times. The investigation quickly focused on Randall Lee Smith, a local man who lived near the trail. Smith had been seen in the area around the time of the murders, and when police searched his home, they found items belonging to the victims. Smith was arrested and charged with the murders. In a plea deal that would later be criticized, Smith pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 2 15-year terms to be served concurrently. Shockingly, he was released after serving only 14 years in 1996. The story might have ended there, but in a disturbing twist, Smith returned to the same area of the Appalachian Trail after his release. In May 2008, nearly 27 years after the original murders, Smith attacked 2 fishermen near the trail. Scott Johnston, 38, and Sean Farmer, 33, were shot and wounded by Smith, who then stole their pickup truck. Smith fled the scene but crashed the truck during a police chase. He was critically injured in the crash and died 3 days later while in police custody. The 2 victims of the 2008 attack survived their injuries. The case of Randall Lee Smith highlights the potential dangers of encountering disturbed individuals in remote wilderness areas. It also raises questions about the justice system that allowed a double murderer to serve only 14 years before returning to the same area to attack again. Following Smith's death, authorities closed both cases, bringing a final, if delayed, resolution to one of the Appalachian Trail's darkest chapters. The trail has seen other violent incidents over the years, but the Smith case remains one of the most notorious. The murders and subsequent attacks led to significant changes in trail safety protocols. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy established a more robust reporting system for suspicious activity, and many hikers now carry satellite communication devices. Trail shelters were redesigned to be more secure, and educational programs were developed to teach hikers about wilderness safety and self-defense. Despite these incidents, millions of hikers continue to enjoy the Appalachian Trail each year. The trail community has grown stronger, with an emphasis on looking out for one another and sharing information about potential dangers. The legacy of the Smith case serves as a sobering reminder that even in the most beautiful natural settings, vigilance and awareness remain essential. These 7 true stories reveal a disturbing reality about our wilderness areas. Places we seek out for peace, solitude, and connection with nature can sometimes harbor deadly dangers not from wildlife or the elements, but from other humans. What makes these cases particularly chilling is how they shatter our perception of safety in the outdoors. When we camp or hike, we expect to face challenges from rough terrain or unpredictable weather, not from predators who view our vulnerability as an opportunity. These stories span decades and cross the continent, from Florida to Canada, from Oklahoma to California. They involve victims of all ages, from young Girl Scouts to experienced hikers. The perpetrators range from opportunistic killers to calculated predators who specifically targeted remote areas. In each case, the isolation that makes these natural settings so appealing also created perfect conditions for violence. Limited communication, minimal security, and distance from help all contributed to these tragedies. Yet despite these horrific events, millions of people continue to enjoy camping and hiking safely each year. These cases have led to important safety improvements, better communication systems, increased ranger patrols, improved shelter designs, and enhanced security protocols. Perhaps the most important lesson from these stories is not to fear the wilderness, but to approach it with appropriate caution. Travel with companions when possible. Let others know your plans, be aware of your surroundings, trust your instincts when something feels wrong. The outdoors remains one of our greatest treasures, a place of beauty, adventure, and renewal. But as these stories remind us, it's also a place where we must remain vigilant. The next time you hear a twig snap outside your tent at night, it's probably just a raccoon, but it never hurts to make sure. Sleep tight, Campers, or maybe just stay home tonight.